Okay, so I liked the Wonder Woman movie quite a bit. It is leaps and bounds ahead of most of the DC movies we have had in a while, and even if you ignore the rest of the DC movies, which I would suggest, this is still a pretty good movie on its own. But I think with just a few changes, this could have gone from a pretty good movie to a great movie. Now, as you probably know by now, whenever I do a fix video on a movie, I include and incorporate all of the other changes I made to the previous movies that are part of the franchise of that movie. Since Wonder Woman is a prequel set before everything else in the DC Extended Universe, that won't really affect the plot of the movie. It just means that we remove the framing device of Batman sending Diana the picture of her and her friends from World War I, which I'm fine with because that didn't really add much of anything to the movie anyway. The biggest plot thing that I would want to change about this movie, and it only takes up less than 5 minutes of the movie itself, so it isn't something that would ripple across the movie necessitating more changes, is that I would get rid of the subplot about Diana being sent to the Amazons as a weapon to be used against Ares. For one, as soon as Hippolyta told young Diana about this weapon, I knew that it would turn out to be Diana. I think a lot of people did. And there's really no good way to foreshadow the God Killer in a subtle way without it becoming transparent, to me anyway, that it's Diana. So we just remove that entirely, because in my opinion, this being her destiny and the reason she was created weakens her character arc. Now sure, she made a choice to go to man's world before she ever found out she was the God Killer, so you could make the argument that she is already the type of person who would go on this mission anyway, even if it wasn't the reason that she was created. But saying that she was created specifically to kill Ares, that raises questions of free will that this movie isn't prepared to answer. If Diana had listened to her mother and stayed on Themyscira, then would Zeus have found some way to force Diana into fulfilling the destiny that she was created for? We don't know because, as near as I can tell, Zeus is still alive, and it was just all of the other gods that Ares killed, but other than sending Diana to the Amazons, Zeus doesn't actually act in this movie. But why bother sending Hippolyta this weapon to use against Ares at all? Hippolyta clearly doesn't want Diana to do this because then she will effectively lose her daughter, and that's stuff that I really like. But shouldn't Zeus be checking in on the Amazons and telling Hippolyta, hey, I sent you that weapon for a reason, she needs to go do that thing? So if we take away the Diana is a weapon created to kill Ares subplot, it tidies things up a little bit. Hippolyta asked the gods for a daughter, and she got one. Period. We don't have to tie Diana's origin to the rest of the plot of the movie. It's like when Tim Burton's Batman makes the Joker into the guy who killed Bruce Wayne's parents. It ties stuff up that happened earlier into stuff that happens later, but is that really necessary? Can't two events happen in a movie that aren't connected while still having a character go through a character arc over the course of the movie? I think you can do that. Another small plot thing that I wanted to tackle is the island of Themyscira itself. Like, I think every version of the island that I've ever seen, it's somehow invisible to man's world. That's cool, I like it. But Steve just happens to crash here, and then the Germans who are chasing him are able to just walk right in once they're past the force field that makes the island invisible. That's not a very good force field if people can see the island once they get close enough to it. And I get that in the comics and most other origins that include Steve coming to Themyscira, he just kind of arrives by happenstance. But that's a little contrived, I think. This is a contrivance that has to happen in order for the rest of the plot to happen, so maybe that's why people are okay with this. But I think we could find a way to explain why Steve is here of all places. We don't know exactly where Themyscira is supposed to be, but if it's anywhere close to Greece, well, it's pretty far from Germany, which is where Steve was when he stole that plane. Hey, why did Steve go south once he stole that plane? If he needed to get his diary to his superiors in London, shouldn't he have just gone to London? What if Ares, who we already see whispering in the ears of a couple of the minor bad guys of the movie, is also whispering in Steve's ear to set the plot of the movie in motion? Why would he do this? I've seen a couple of different explanations for how Ares and his powers work. One, his very presence fuels the fires of war, which this movie toys with but ultimately says no, that's not really how it is. The other thing I've seen that I like a little bit better is that Ares doesn't cause wars, but he gets stronger when men independently fight wars. And since we already see that Zeus considerably weakened Ares when he cast him to Earth, he needs something to boost his strength. Maybe in Diana, he sees a way to fan the flames of war even more. The mortals on both sides of the conflict are seriously considering an armistice that will put a stop to the war. Maybe Ares whispers in Steve's ear that it would be a really good idea to go south, and then somehow Ares is able to temporarily weaken the barrier that ordinarily keeps mortals from seeing or entering the island. It is here that Ares hopes that one of the Amazons, doesn't matter who, will accompany Steve back to man's world and will enter the war and prolong it for another few years. I guess you could do what the 2009 animated Wonder Woman movie did and have someone on the island be a servant of Ares, and maybe they touch a button or something that temporarily makes the island visible. But then you've got a whole extra subplot to deal with, and this movie wisely gets rid of the island and the rest of the Amazons by the end of the first act of the movie, and putting a spy working for Ares among the ranks would only keep them in the movie longer. So to keep it simple, we will just say that Ares took a gamble and used a considerable amount of his power that he had gained since World War I started and made Themyscira visible to Steve, and incidentally the Germans pursuing pursuing him after convincing Steve to go south. This keeps the plot of the movie pretty much intact, but it takes one contrivance that I had ignored the first couple of times that I watched this movie, and I assume most everyone else had as well, and it has that be generated from a character. It's always good if the plot can happen because of the decisions and actions of the characters in the story, and not just cuz. And speaking of Themyscira, something I did have a small issue with when I first saw the movie is, why does Hippolyta tell Diana that she will never be able to return to the island if she leaves? In the Justice League cartoon of my youth, Diana is banished from the island for breaking their rules, and Diana is going against her mother's wishes here, so I guess it's possible that she is being banished here, but the movie doesn't quite make that clear enough for me. But I may be just kinda dumb, and this might have been perfectly clear to everyone else, I don't know. So instead of Hippolyta banishing Diana, which may or may not be happening here, I'm going to say that most of the time, the island either moves across dimensions or is slightly phased out of this dimension, and so once Diana leaves, it will be nearly impossible for her to return. And if we're going to say that Ares temporarily revealed the island's presence to Steve, then that would probably make it a little easier for the rest of the Amazons to accept that Ares is at work here, which is something the movie wants us to doubt along with Steve. I'll get to that in a minute. So this way, Hippolyta doesn't want Diana to go because she doesn't want to lose her daughter, but she does see that Ares needs to be stopped, and she can warn Diana that it would be very difficult for her to return once she leaves, and Diana leaves anyway. So Steve doubts that Ares is real. See? I told you I would get to it in a minute. This is a weird subplot that doesn't really make any sense at all. Steve sees a lot of weird stuff in the first act of this movie. An island that from 200 yards away is completely invisible, magic healing water, and a lasso that compels the wearer to tell the truth, and he knows that it works since it was used on him. But for some reason, he doubts that Ares, the god of war, is real. I guess I get what this movie is doing. Diana believes Ares is the cause of the Great War, and she wants to stop it. And her lesson she learns from both Steve and Ares is that people just suck, and they don't need any outside help starting wars. So to really hammer that character arc home, we have to have Steve doubt that Ares is real, so that in his disbelief, he can tell Diana that people don't need help starting wars, even though he's seen all this other unbelievable stuff in the first act of the movie. Now don't get me wrong, I really like the idea that the war is not being caused by Ares, but I don't think we needed Agent Scully here constantly rolling his eyes every time Diana mentions Ares. So there's two things that you could do to change this. One, Steve just believes that Ares is real since he sees all of this other stuff that is pretty fantastic. Or two, maybe Zeus can make an appearance at some point before Diana leaves the island. I don't like that as much since he wouldn't really have any purpose in this story, so let's just say that Steve believes Diana. She saved his life, he's saved hers. Him looking down on her beliefs doesn't really work for me. And that leads into the biggest thing that I would want to change about this movie, which is the core of most of Diana and Steve's interactions. What I do like about these two is that Gal Gadot and Chris Pine are both very charming and believable in their roles. Gadot pulls off the innocence and naivete of her character very well, and Pine pulls off the pragmatism of Steve Trevor very nicely. There are a few scenes of confrontation of ideals and beliefs between these two that could have been much more abrasive in the hands of different actors. Their chemistry really helps this movie tremendously. Having said that, there's some things here that don't quite work. The movie has Wonder Woman go from being a very naive and sheltered princess to understanding how the world works. All the problems she sees cannot be fixed when you push the easy button, which is what she thinks when she leaves the island. But I've seen some people watch this movie and they come away from it thinking that Diana ends the war when she kills the real Ares. Oh, spoilers, but Professor Lupin is the real Ares, not William Stryker. Now, I didn't think that when I watched the movie. It was my understanding that after Wonder Woman kills the real Ares, the war keeps going for as long as it did in the real world. But since at least one person misunderstood that, or maybe I misunderstood it and that guy was right, I don't know, I would want it to be made clearer that Diana killing Ares has no bearing on the war. Maybe we could move the plot of this movie to 1916 or 1917 instead of having it be in the year that the war ended. Okay, quick little message from a me that's a little later in the future than the one who recorded this video. I did misinterpret the movie. It turns out that that guy who thought that Diana killing Ares does in the war, it turns out that he was right. After I recorded that, I found yet another person who thought that, and then I thought, well, maybe I am wrong, and I did some looking into it. This movie does indeed take place in 1918, and that is when the war ended, and looking at it, it does seem like even after Diana has her little revelation that killing the god of war is not going to easily fix all of her problems, that the movie then goes into her killing the god of war and fixing all of her problems. That's incredibly weird and lazy, which is why I didn't think that the movie did it. But yes, I was wrong. Those other guys, they were right. So anyway, take it away past me. But back to Diana and Steve. Diana has a clear arc that she goes through, but Steve is more or less the same when we first meet him and when he goes through his heroic sacrifice. He's willing to die to save innocence at the beginning of the movie, and he's willing to die to save innocence at the end. There's not much of an arc there. He and Diana should have had dual character arcs, and this would have been tricky, but they both should have informed each other's arcs. Before Diana and Steve leave Themyscira, Steve quotes his father and says, "You can either do something or nothing," and he is choosing to do something. And it seems that Steve saying this inspires Diana to do something, even though we already saw her campaigning to go with Steve back to man's world to stop Ares before he said that. I don't mind Steve, in a way, helping Diana along in her arc, but I don't like this particular line because it kind of places Steve where he should be after he's gone through his arc. So here's what I would do differently. Diana's arc more or less goes the same way that it did in the movie. She thinks Ares is the cause of all the problems that she sees, and then she realizes the world is more complicated than that. Steve needs to be more jaded and cynical when we first see him, almost world-weary. I guess it could kind of be like Lois Lane and Superman's dichotomy, where Lois is very cynical, but then she sees the optimism that Superman exudes, and she is inspired by it. Do that with Steve and Diana. Diana will see things like women starving in the trenches, or men losing limbs to gain barely an inch in a year. And Steve, even though he's a pessimist, will hate to see someone who is so bright-eyed and optimistic starting to see the bad side of the world. And meanwhile, Steve will start off thinking that the world is horrible, but then Diana can show him that there are bright spots to the world also. And then you can still end Steve's arc by having him sacrifice himself, but you build up to that instead of it feeling like something that Steve would have done when we first meet him. But I've seen some people criticize that scene because it feels like Steve has the upper hand in a decision to sacrifice himself, and since this is Diana's movie, some people feel that she gets underutilized in the climax. And I can see where they're coming from. So maybe instead of Steve going and telling Diana that he's going to sacrifice himself and she needs to go and do this thing, they can both quickly see that this thing is about to happen and that thing is about to happen. Let's split up and you go do that and I'll go do this. Okay, we're in agreement, let's go. Then Steve can realize, oh, I can't just quickly disarm this bomb, I have to die destroying it. And then he does. But doing this would hopefully lessen the biggest thing that I disliked about the interactions between Steve and Diana. Throughout the movie, we get a whole lot of, I am wise Steve Trevor, allow me to impart some wisdom about how the world works. And I think it gets a pass because, like I said earlier, Chris Pine is a charming actor. But it feels weird having a man give Wonder Woman, who is supposed to represent female empowerment, all of this sage advice about how the world works. And it goes the other way too. When Diana leads the charge at No Man's Land, I get that this is supposed to be a heck yeah moment, but it's a weird scene. Diana is all, how dare you mortals not advance and take this area back from the enemy. Like, I'm sure they would have if they had super strength and super speed like Wonder Woman does. I don't have a problem with Steve helping Diana in her journey to learn more about how the world is, as long as Diana is equally telling Steve how the world should be. Now, the only other thing that I don't like about this movie is the final fight with Ares. I can't really put my finger on it, but this whole scene just feels really generic. With all of the explosions and shouting and CGI armor that the movie felt the need to shove in there, there is so much going on here that it's hard for me to connect with the movie at this point. Which is a shame because I was engaged by pretty much the rest of the movie. You can have a couple of characters fighting each other without it looking like the scene came out of a testosterone-fueled nightmare world. Look at something like, say, the 1999 movie The Mummy. That climax actually involves 4 characters doing stuff, but I feel more engaged there than I do here. There aren't explosions and screaming trying to keep my attention. It's 2 guys getting into fisticuffs while another guy tries to save his sister with a magic spell. Now, if that movie that came out almost 20 years before this movie can balance 4 characters in its climax, surely this movie with only 2 characters actively participating in this scene should be able to at least match that. When I first watched the movie, I was disappointed that they put Ares in his armor. I somewhat jokingly said that they should have kept him in his civilian clothes that he wore throughout the movie, and while that would have looked silly, I think the ending would have felt more visceral and real if it was just Professor Lupin physically fighting Wonder Woman. You could have him use his electric powers that he apparently has, and it burns his shirt off if you think that it looks too silly for him in his dapper clothes to be fighting Wonder Woman. But the CGI Ares costume kind of pulled me out of the movie. It wasn't a deal breaker, but especially in this most recent time that I watched it, it was a little bit of a disappointing way to end the movie. And that's about it for this one, guys. Another somewhat shorter fix video, and for that we can thank the movie for not needing that many changes in the first place. I still really like this movie, and most of the problems that I had with it don't deter me from enjoying it in any way. But like I said earlier, I think these relatively minor changes could have elevated this movie considerably. So I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, do all of those things that you love doing if you like videos. And if you really like this video, you might enjoy my next video where I offer unsolicited advice to fix movies that I feel need improvements. It will be the 2017 movie Justice League, so be sure to check this space for it to drop sometime soon. And I do other videos besides these fix videos, so look for some of those if you like, while you wait for me to do that Justice League thing. In the meantime, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later. Hey, another little quick afterword that I recorded much later after I recorded the rest of this video. I wanted to say that I did go and watch 2 videos about how to improve this movie from a channel called Nando vs. Movies. You've probably heard of this guy. If you like these videos that I do where I alter movies and try to improve them in some way, you'll almost definitely like what he does. He's got like over 10,000 subscribers, so you've probably already heard of this guy. But I waited until after I had already scripted and recorded this video before I watched his videos. And I do that in general with my channel, both with videos like this where I am attempting to make a fix on an existing movie, or on the videos where I am reviewing something. If it's something that's really hot at the moment, generally with movies, whenever I watch a movie, I try to avoid all reviews until after I have already put my thoughts out there. The reason is my mind is very susceptible, and if I go and watch, say, Mike and Jay from Half in the Bag or Red Letter Media, if I watch their video before I do my own, I am going to subconsciously regurgitate what they say in my own video, and I don't want to do that. I want my thoughts to be honest, and I want what you see on this channel to be my thoughts. And that's why with these fix videos, I am trying very hard to avoid other people's ideas on what to do here. I am on Reddit and the subreddit Fixing Movies. I read almost none of the posts because if it's for a movie that I am interested in doing a video on, I don't want to accidentally take someone's idea and plug it as my own idea. So I try to avoid watching videos from Nando if it's something that I want to do a video on myself, but in this case I did go and watch his 2 videos, and they are awesome. His version of Wonder Woman would have been 1,000 times better than mine, especially his idea concerning Dr. Poison, but I also really liked his idea concerning Ares. The one thing that I kind of disagree with is he said that killing off Ares would be like shooting yourself in the foot because Wonder Woman has such a small pool of villains to use in future movies. And I agree with that, but I would say that these movies seem to be shooting themselves in the foot anyway, since the next Wonder Woman movie is going to be set some 60 years after the first Wonder Woman movie. So it's not like they're going to be able to use a whole lot of recurring characters if they're going to keep jumping forward this much in time. But go watch his videos on how to improve the Wonder Woman movie. The channel is Nando vs. Movies. Really great channel, but like I said, I watched those videos after I made this video, so I didn't want to accidentally take something that he created and subconsciously or consciously pass it off as my own. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there real quick. I hope that you guys like this video, and I will see you guys next week. Have a good one.